One of the biggest question marks as the primary hot stove warms up is whether President Donald Trump will face a Republican or conservative independent challenge. When it comes to who that challenger might be, right now all eyes are on the outgoing governor of Ohio, John Kasich, who is our guest this morning. Governor, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So there's not much in politics that you haven't achieved. You've risen to the highest levels of power in Congress. You've governed a state that has an economy bigger than most countries.
I haven't thought about that. That's cool.
Yeah, and you've run for president and you won in Dixville Notch. So why not just ride off into the sunset?
Well, I mean, the sunset. No, I'm going to ride off to the future, but I don't quite know what the future is going to bring. And I'm actually here because the union leader asked me to come and make a speech about the importance of the press, which I think is critically important for our nation, because the press is an institution that holds the powerful and the rich accountable, and that's really critical in a society like ours. And I really don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to be moving out of my job as governor. I've got a lot of things that I'm thinking about what I'm going to do, but in terms of the politics of it in the future, I don't know yet. But if look, Adam, if I feel like there's something I can do to bring this nation closer together, because I think our nation needs healed, and all the negativity, the victimization, all this stuff, it's not America that I know. And if I can be a voice to help bring that together, great. And by the way, when I look at the elections, the midterm elections, I'm encouraged by one thing. People are rejecting the name-calling, the rhetoric, the division, the victimization. They don't like that. And that makes me feel really good. It means that we can recover from all this.
So if you're going to use your voice, perhaps in another bid for the White House in 2020, your timeline has to be pretty short here in terms of making that private decision. Share with us, when do you feel like you have to make a decision whether you're in or out?
Did you see The Wizard of Oz when the Wicked Witch came in and turned the sand dial upside down and said, when this runs out, my pretty? I don't have anything like that in my head. I just don't know.
But
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to do it, and if I do it, I can't tell you what the timing is. Because I don't want to come here and waste people's time, burn the energy of people who, who support me, burn up resources, if I'm going to come here and not do very well. Because that diminishes what I think has been a voice that's more powerful. What I'm most concerned about is giving people a sense that power comes from the bottom up, from the people to the top, whether it's the civil rights movement, ending the Vietnam War. It wasn't the politicians that did that. It were the people. And they drove a message and they drove energy to the top. And I think we're seeing some of that today. And I want people to know that they are made special, that they have certain gifts, that no one has ever been like them before or will be like them again, and they have a destiny to be part of making our nation and our culture stronger. Now, I don't know where that's going to take me. Maybe it isn't into politics. I don't know.
So about 30 Democrats or so could end up running for president conceivably. Does the president deserve a challenge from within his own party or from a conservative independent?
I hear people say that. I don't know. I mean, it's not for me to decide. I mean, it's about me not telling somebody else what they ought to do. You just have to see how it goes.
You've said yourself recently that there could be an opportunity.
Look, I've been the most outspoken, consistently outspoken Republican in the last, I don't know, 2 years or whatever. So as to whether somebody should run against him or not, that's up to somebody else. That's not up to me to dictate. And whether I do, whether I don't, it's all options are on the table, Adam. And the problem with this interview is that, and people watching, they're going to turn the television off because they're like, why doesn't the guy just tell us what he's going to do? It's because I don't know what I'm going to do. And that depends on circumstances, opportunities, and whether I feel that by being a candidate again for president, that I can make a major impact. If I determine that I can and it would heal, then I'm likely to do it. If I look at it and think, it's just not, the cards aren't in it, then I won't. It's not like I sit around and dream about the fact that I have to be a candidate again, although I love coming to New Hampshire.
Absolutely, and we love asking these questions. Weather. I just want to ask one more thing in this lane here. Could you run as an independent? You've been talking about that recently.
All options are on the table, but I'm a Republican. I'd love to see the Republican Party. Look, in my state as the governor, think about this. The Republican governor of Illinois defeated, lost. The governor of Wisconsin, Republican, lost. The governor candidate in Michigan, lost. In Ohio, all the Republicans won. Why? Well, a big reason for it is because of what we've done in the last 8 years, which is to make sure that no one is left behind. If you're a small business, we help you. If you're successful, we don't penalize you. If you are mentally ill, drug addicted, we tend to you. If you're disabled, we try to help you. If you're a minority, we want you to be included, and we do. We think ahead, excitement, innovation. That is the program that I think works for the country, and I think it's why our candidates did so well in the state of Ohio.
How is that different from what President Trump is doing?
Well, look, I didn't endorse him or support him because he's a negative populist. He divides, and he creates victims. And I think the problems that he talks about, some of them income inequality, inability to get health care, whatever, I think these are real problems. But I think that together, if we work together and we forget all the politics on both sides, and we focus on solving problems, then we can help people to rise. And that's what we need to do, because you don't want people to lose hope. When they lose hope, we know they resort to drugs. Their life is not as meaningful as it was intended to be. And I think that it's important for all of us to do what we can to make sure that people can realize their God-given potential.
Do you think something bigger is at stake in 2020 than just an election?
Well, they say that on every election. I mean, I get you good ratings, but I mean, they're all important. I think they're very important. I will say that the world itself is wondering, is the America we're seeing today, the America alone and all that business, is that the future, or is this just a temporary respite from American leadership? I think that's something that is very significant.
When President Trump declares himself a nationalist, some people, that makes the hair stand up on the back of their neck. Other people see that as a logical extension of patriotism. Where do you stand on that spectrum?
Well, look, I think, this is an interesting question, because you had the president of France talk about this. Look, we want to have a culture. We want to believe in ourselves. We want to think about how we can make ourselves better. But that's not mutually exclusive from being a part of the community of nations. If everybody is just working independently and they reject the notion that they're part of an international community, well, that's where we were, and we saw 2 world wars start over it in just recent time. So the idea that we look out for ourselves, but yet we are connected to those that believe in individual rights, the freedom of press, the freedom of religion, the cultural ethic of the West, which is what we are the leader of. And Adam, the way we have to think about this, and I know sometimes people say, well, those problems over there are not our problems, all right? But here's the thing that America does. America, since World War II, has stood in the breach, just like on a playground in a way. And when people want to fight over land or money or whatever, we've always been there to say, no, that is not acceptable to go to war over that. So we lead an indispensable role that we should be so proud of. And we don't want to walk away from that, because if we walk away from directing, in some ways, the rights and wrongs of other nations, then I fear that conflict is just around the corner.
You mentioned drug addiction and hopelessness. I want to circle back to that. Ohio is just as deeply affected by the opioid crisis as New Hampshire is.
We're doing so much better.
I was going to say, I'm curious.
So is Chris Sununu.
I'm curious, with you guys have Medicaid expansion, are there any things that are working to combat the opioid crisis?
Yeah. We have an 8-year low in deaths related to prescribed opiates. And we also have a 30% decline in the number of doses. You see, before, people could get all these things, and then when there were shortages of them, they went for something else like heroin or cocaine, which is now laced with fentanyl. But I know that Chris Sununu and we've talked about this. We have restrictions on the amount of doses that can be prescribed by a doctor. It's like 7 days for an adult and 5 days for a kid. If you violate that, and we can check you because we have technology that can monitor this, we'll take your license away, maybe even prosecute you. But nobody's trying to fight against that I see. We've made tremendous progress. Our death among this fentanyl-laced drugs are up, and this is a problem. And what I would say is to people who are listening, it's not, you can't just go out and score these drugs on a street corner, because there's poison in them and it will kill you. But for those things that we've been able to control in the state, which is the way in which our licensed doctors and nurses and everybody else that can prescribe operate, we find ourselves in a much better position. The reason why it's important for people to know that is the stories every day are about, how there's no answer, everything, but we've seen progress. no mission accomplished flag, but we've seen significant progress in terms of battling this problem.
Governor Kasich, we thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Will we see you back here?
I would guess in the spring, maybe a golf match with John Sununu. I don't know.
We'll see. All right. Thank you, Governor.